and welcome to Read It with Whiskey, the place to be if you are a sci-fi or fantasy reader. My name is Laura and I am your host. I am a reader, writer, and whiskey drinker here to share with you some amazing self-published authors within the sci-fi and fantasy genres. On today's episode, we have Naomi Kelly. Naomi is an indie YA fantasy author living in Dublin, Ireland. Her descriptive writing style and love for all things magic and mythological make reading her stories the perfect escape from modern-day life. I just mentioned it, she lives in Dublin, Ireland, and I love talking to authors in different countries, but this was really ironic because when I recorded this episode with Naomi, I had just traveled to Dublin. So that definitely put in a little bit of a different spin to the episode, which you will definitely hear as we get into it. But first, let me tell you about her book that we're going to be talking about, Meraki, a Syren Story. Her song is a gift bestowed by the gods, so why does it feel like a curse? 17-year-old Ren thinks she has just swum away from the greatest threat in the sea. That's until she finds herself being hauled upon a warlord's boat. With her life at the mercy of a young, temperamental king, Ren must decide who is her ultimate enemy. Can fate be altered? What do gods have planned? Sirens are bound to tell the truth, but that doesn't mean their lives cannot be riddled with lies. Such a fun story, such a fun interview. Let's jump in with Naomi. Hello, Naomi, and how's your day going? Welcome to Read It with Whiskey.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. My day is good so far. I woke up and did a little reading, which is always a good way to start the day. How are you?
Perfect way to start the morning. I love to have like a little cup of coffee and read a book in the morning. Just perfect way to wake up. And I am waking up. It is 6 a.m. for me, but it's a little bit later in the day over there for you in Ireland.
It's 11. So
11.
It's kind of a nice time.
It's ironic because last week I was in Ireland as we record this, and Naomi is over there. And so it's just such a small world. The irony. I love it. Meant to be. So today we're going to be talking about your book, Meraki, and I'm so excited to fill in the listeners all about this book because I loved it. I binge read this Syren Story, and let's just dive right in. So before we really talk about the book, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing?
Sure. So kind of proper writing journey began in probably 2019. Before that, I had done kind of fanfics and, headcanon stories, the typical Twilight girl saga. In 2019, I started writing properly and I wrote a story about magicians, which is Straub Obsidian. It's the first book I ever released. And then Meraki came about a year and a half later. And I never intended to write a book about the sea or mermaids or anything. It literally just became an idea in my head that I couldn't stop thinking about, and I had to start writing it, and it just exploded from there.
So cool. Oh, and I haven't read many stories about mermaids or sirens or underwater, and I think that is really starting to come up in the industry right now. I think they're making a live action Little Mermaid coming out in 2023, and so this is perfect timing, marketing wise, just putting it out there.
And it's so weird because I feel like obviously, I'm not saying I'm a trendsetter or anything. I'm only an indie author, but it is weird because I feel like a lot of indie authors and publishing houses all kind of individually started doing mermaid stories or pirate stories and things like that, and it kind of seems to be growing all together. Because I know sometimes with genres like The Hunger Games or Divergent, dystopian ones will come up and then there'll be a huge swell and then loads of people chasing that trend. But I feel with the mermaid and pirate thing, it's kind of growing all together because there's so many different books from different threads that all have a symbolism in the sea, which I love.
Yeah. And I think there's so much you can do with the concept of underwater because nobody really knows what's going on underwater.
It's really ironic for someone that writes about the sea. It does actually kind of creep me out a little bit. When you think about how little we know about it,
Yeah, exactly.
More people have been to the moon than the bottom of our ocean. That creeps me out so much.
It's terrifying. and you see on social media and online, these little videos of people seeing mermaids or seeing something on the rocks that jumps into the water. We really don't know what's going on underwater. So who knows? Maybe this is actually a real story and it's not actually fiction.
Ren could be out there somewhere in the very big blue ocean.
So you have written a few books now, and this is only the first book in this series. You have a few more. But overall, as a writer, what do you think is your favorite part about putting books out into the world?
I know it sounds super cliche, but like I do write with the expectation that probably no one's going to read it. I just kind of write it for myself and I put it out there. If someone else loves it, then great. And one of my favorite things is when someone reaches out and say like, I really love this book, or they'll be like, my favorite part was this scene, and it's something that I didn't think someone else would love, or someone drew fan art of like two characters together, and that's such a fangirl moment for me because it's like something I thought of in my head is tangible in someone else's world, which I love. So just having people really enjoy the world and get excited about it is probably the best part.
So really quickly, can you just tell us a list of all the books that you do have published currently?
Yeah, so although I published Tribe of Obsidian, that's currently off the market because I'm reworking it and I want to grow it. I think that happens a lot with like first books. You release it and then you're like, hang on, I wanna add to this. So that's currently on pause. So Meraki, A Syren Story is my first official book that's out there. And then its sequel, Chiron, which is part two of the Syren Story. They're like what I call a duology or a duet, so they go together. And then there is a companion novel that just came out in May, which is the third story, like a spin-off, which follows two characters that you meet throughout the first two books on their own adventure. So you can read it as book three because the story just continues, but it's kind of new characters, new point of views, new islands, everything.
Very cool. And are there going to be any other books within this series, or are you just keeping it as a duology?
For Marking Paris, that would be a duology, but I do have a really hard time saying goodbye to characters. So it was meant to just be book one and book two always. And then I was like, oh, but I love these characters. And, this is what I think they would be doing after the book's finished, and kind of wrote another story. And I've already been like, nope, that's it, just those three. But I know realistically, there's probably going to be more in the future because I just love this world so much that it's hard to leave.
We authors, we fall in love with a character or a world that we've built, and it's really hard to tear yourself out, especially when the mind starts traveling and you start imagining like new storylines and new things like, well, what if this happened? What if this happened? And the way that we're not going to talk spoilers, but the way that book one ended, there is so much that you could do with the world. So I'm going to dive into book two and then the companion story. And I'll probably email you in a couple weeks and say, hey, you just should keep writing in this world.
I will happily keep writing.
I love it. So let's tell our listeners what Meraki is all about. Can you give us a little blurb?
Meraki is a YA fantasy series that follows Ren, who is a 17-year-old siren. And she lives, underwater as a siren would. And she swims away from like the biggest threat in her life. So without it being a spoiler, there's something really big. She swims away from it and she thinks that she's in the all clear. And then she gets trapped by an enemy king who holds her aboard. So he captures her because he wants to use her really powerful mythical song as a weapon for his own agenda. And that's kind of where the whole story kicks off. It really starts in the action, which is something a lot of readers say, like you start, there's no 100-page intro, like you start in the action. The first couple of pages, she's getting caught. So it's definitely what people will call like a quick read or something to kind of get you out of a reading slump. A lot of action because I hate reading boring bits and books. So I think it's great for people who grew up loving mermaids or like Pirates of the Caribbean or anything kind of action-based revolving the sea. But there's also lots and lots of Greek mythology in there. A lot of the creatures, a lot of the terms. Meraki is a Greek word. And, gods and goddesses and spells and magic. It's a little bit of everything. So I think it's one that you do have to kind of read to like understand how all these elements come together.
And I had like the Little Mermaid vibes, Pirates of the Caribbean vibes.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration behind this story?
The inspiration, it's one of those things where it's like super cliche, but you know how inspiration just strikes you out of anywhere. I was walking, Ireland is obviously a tiny island, lots of beaches, lots of coasts everywhere. So you go half an hour, you're at the beach. So I was walking with my boyfriend and there was like a boy or something just bobbing along the water. And I literally just made a joke. I was like, oh, there's a mermaid, like joking. And then it just started. I went on a feminist rant about how Ariel in the Little Mermaid like should have never given up her voice. And, that she basically gave away her power to like get a guy. It was a very deep feminist rant. I think I was just like in a mood that day. But it just started this idea where I was like, what if she was really powerful and didn't give up her voice? What if she her voice was like a weapon or a tool that she could use, and maybe would be hunted for that. And became this whole thing where at the end of, like, no spoilers, at the end of my book, I wanted her to have more power than she started with, not less. And that was kind of, I wanted it to have the vibe of The Little Mermaid, but almost be the opposite at the same time. So that's kind of where the inspiration started. And then once I started writing, it just grew from there.
Oh, so much fun. And yeah, I like that concept because it's true. Like all of the old Disney movies, all of the women are put down and give up things about themselves
Yeah.
or change themselves to get the
Yeah.
man or to win in the end. And so flipping that on its head and having her story be more about coming into her own and becoming more powerful, that is really, really cool. She's a siren, and I've always kind of thought, whatever you believe in, like, okay, is it a mermaid? Is it a siren? Are they the same thing? Are they different? So can you tell us a little bit about what a siren is and how they are a little bit different than mermaids in your
Sure.
world?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that they're two of the same, or one is just an older word or something. But they are different. And obviously, with things that are super ancient, these things branch out and diverge, and you get lots of different meanings for the same word. But my understanding is a mermaid is half woman, half fish, or half dolphin, whatever you want to look at it. The one that we probably know most better. They tend to have to live in the water, or if they come out of the water, they have to, stay close to it, or if it's H2O, if they touch water, they turn back into a mermaid. There's always some connection to water. With sirens, it's depending on what kind of branch of history you look at. They're more bird-like. So that's where the word siren for police cars and ambulance comes from. The sirens, as they make noise. Their voices are very powerful. They lure people in. That's where the idea of luring sailors to their death or their demise comes from. But they also live either in the water or by the water. So sometimes they won't have a tail that's permanent. Sometimes they will. Really depends. And sometimes they'll have wings. Sometimes they won't. But the voice is always there. That's the most important aspect. So in Meraki, the sirens that I've created for this world, they live underwater, but their tails aren't permanent. They fashion them out of seaweed and kelp and things like that, and they're removable. So they can live on land, but there's just a transition period of about 7 minutes where their gills on their ribs have to close and their lungs come back into normal functioning breathing. So that's kind of how I have both worlds in mind. So she can be underwater and above, which was really fun to write about.
I loved the transition concept. I liked that it wasn't an easy transition. It's actually painful for the siren to transition into human lungs again. I think that brought a little bit more weight to her being captured within the first few pages of the story, like you said, because it's not an easy process for her. It's something that she has to suffer through. I think that brought a lot to the story because I had just thought about, the Little Mermaid, and she has legs now. It was so easy, Disney.
That's the thing. I think sometimes with magic or people that can shift between either dimensions or water to land things. Sometimes it's like it's too pretty and it's too easy, and it's like there's glitter and then suddenly she has legs and she walks away and stuff. And I was like, no, because if you bring a fish out of a boat, they're panicking, they're flopping. It's not pretty, it's scary. And I wanted to capture that initial moment of panic where she's like, I can't breathe because she's changing from her gills to her lungs. And I wanted it to be like a little bit darker. So like it is still YA, fine for teens to read, but it's a little bit more gritty. The magic, it has a consequence to it.
Yeah, I like that. It has a consequence to it. Oh, so cool. And there is a whole magic system within this book. And you already mentioned it has a lot to do with folklore and old tales from long, long time ago. And so a lot of it comes from that. And I actually put a note because I loved this paragraph. I don't know why, it just really stuck with me. So I'm going to read it real quick. So it's like in the first quarter of the book. Page 47, for those of you who have the book next to you while you're listening. Oh, the damned descendants, mortals with a god in their ancient history, whose ichor still lingers through their bloodline. Technically speaking, sirens and other creatures are a type of descendant, though we would never call ourselves that. We were crafted by the gods with pure ichor and intention, not just the result of some mortal who fell into bed with a god. I don't know why, but that paragraph just stuck with me. And I thought it was just so well written. And it really solidified the concepts of who these sirens are and the power that their blood has. So speak a little bit about that and how that inspiration from folklore kind of like came into your writing.
Yeah, so I think we're very familiar with the idea of like demigods and, Zeus sleeping with anything and creating all of these children that have powers. And we're kind of used to that concept, but I wanted there to be kind of a distinguishing factor between there's the descendants who, some god just took a woman, and there's children who, like, maybe their 12th great grandparent was a god and they have this tiny little bit of ichor that makes them maybe faster or stronger. In this case, it makes, someone immune to her song. But the creatures that were crafted by the gods, they would never call themselves the descendants because they were built with intention. They were crafted. There's this idea of them being sculpted into the vision of the gods. And that's why she has so much more ichor, which is something you'll see if they cut themselves or they're bleeding or anything. She doesn't have red blood. It's almost like a deep navy because it's the blood of the gods. Whereas some of the mortals who are descendants, when they injure themselves, they still have the red blood of humans. It's just tinged a little bit. It's kind of a purpley color. So just this idea of like, in our society, we have this whole ranking system and people seem to think they're better or worse than others, even though we're all the same. Just the same idea, the idea that people will feel superior. And I kind of wanted to have that idea in the books. But the gods are really, really important in the Syren story.
Oh, I love it. And I love hearing it from the author. I think that's one of the things I love about my podcast so much is because I can kind of like get into your head and figure out where you came up with the idea. And I just loved that. I love that concept. And I hadn't been able to read a book like this yet for the show. So I was excited to be able to do that too.
Cool.
Okay, so we talked about the magic. We talked about the people a little bit, not too much about characters yet. We'll get to that in a second. But we also have to talk about world building. So you not only had to create a world underwater, but also on land. And there's actually a map in the front of the book. Did you create this map or was that you did?
I created that. It took hours. So whenever someone like just even looked at it for a second, I'm like, thank you, because it just took a very long time, but it was really, really fun to do. And I think sometimes when you're doing it yourself, because I have the vision in my head, it's easier for me to just do it myself rather than trying to explain it to someone who could do it a lot quicker, to be fair. But it was kind of fun. It was a learning process, learning how to draw maps and things. So it was good.
And we have 3 locations that the story takes place: Seven Spikes, the Lunar Lands, and then Soli Island or Solil?
Yeah, so Solil Island. So if you have it in front of you, I can just describe it. The central island is the Lunar Lands. That's the most important one. So it's shaped like a big crescent moon, and there's stars and like kind of little adjoining archipelago. So that's like the main island. That's where the king lives and everything. Above that, you have the Seven Spikes. So it is a rugged kind of northern island with 7 spikes coming out of it, very aptly named. And that's where the sirens and the centaurs and the fae and the dryads, all the kind of magical creatures live really far up north. And they don't really leave. That's where they stay. That's their island. That's their home. And then at the bottom of the map, you have the Soil Islands, which is shaped kind of like a sun. So that comes in, that's part of the reason why the king captures Ren at the start. He has a mission, he has to go there, and he needs a powerful weapon to enter the island because they have really good fortification, and that's why her song is needed. So that's kind of the map where everything is laid out, and you travel the whole map throughout the book, which is, I think, really exciting because it's not just one island. You go on the boat with the characters and travel.
Mm-hmm. I like that there was a different locations, and there's some consequence again that comes up when sirens have some things about them where they have to do what they promise. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to give stuff away.
It's just to do with, in the 3rd book I actually wrote, I'll probably be adding it into Meraki as well, or putting it up on my social media so that you can, make a printable version. But I have it's an ichor hierarchy. So you can see everything that I'm getting across in the book. So the idea is the more ichor you have in your veins, the more truthful you have to be. So it's the idea that gods are just and righteous and they don't lie. So the closer linked to a god you are, the more ichor you have, you can't really lie. So anything you say is almost like a binding oath or a promise. And if you make I hereby promise this, if you break that, there are very strong consequences, which is a big factor in the book. And that carries out throughout the whole series in varying degrees, depending on what creature it is.
Oh, I love that. And it's hard to explain without giving spoilers. And so everyone, you just have to go and read the book and you will understand. But the reason I brought it up is because you do travel the whole map and she has to travel the whole map because of these consequences. And again, it's not always easy. There's pain and
Yeah.
people have to read the book. I'm not going to talk about it anymore because I'm just going to end up accidentally giving spoilers.
When I was writing the part that you're talking about, it was actually like very emotional because I think it's kind of like, it's a bit of like a draining, hard thing to go through. And when I was writing it, it took me a while because I'd have to take breaks because it's such an intense chapter.
Definitely intense, but it made me as the reader like really feel for the characters. And I really just enjoyed that process, even though it was painful for Ren. I think it was really good overall. It really added to the story. So speaking of characters, we've got a few characters within this book, and I would love to hear who is your favorite character, or maybe who is your favorite character to write within the story.
So I mean, Ren's probably my favorite. She's like the main character. She's the main POV. And even when I was writing my most recent book, she's not the main character, but I had to get a little snippet of her in there. I just missed her so much. So Ren is probably my favorite. I love that she's kind of sarcastic without being like rude. She's kind of a little bit sassy. And even though she has a backbone, she's still a little bit kind of shy and non-confrontational at times, which I really like because I think sometimes when I pick up a book and I'm reading with the character and they say, oh, like super sassy and really sarcastic and stuff, I find them like almost annoying to read because they'll fight with anyone about anything. So I wanted Ren to be like a little bit more level-headed. So I loved writing about her. But Kellen the King was probably my favorite character, hands down, to write. I just love his personality and how he's like a little bit hot-headed and he acts first and then thinks after. And you know, I just love like his hobbies and that he likes gambling and, you know, that he's a bit of a risk taker and he's just really fun to write about. And he brings kind of a little bit of lightness to the story, which I enjoy.
Yeah, I liked him and I liked how their relationship evolved through the book. I liked that he was involved from the very beginning also.
Yeah.
Very start of the book. So good. And I think of the characters, I mean, I liked all of the characters. I liked their hunt to save some people that were taken. And I liked the evil character within the book. We're not going to talk too much about that because I don't want to give spoilers. Again, I've got to stop saying spoilers. But also another character I really liked was Dove. I think the relationship that she had with Ren was really special. I really liked that.
That was sweet. Yeah, I like her. And then as like a nod to Dove in like the second and third books, I have other characters called Rhea and things. I think you meet her at the end of that. So all the sirens are named after birds because they're bird-like. So each siren has a bird-related name. But because I can't feature Dove in future books as much, I have kind of given like little nods to her and things because she was like such a wonderful character to write about.
Yeah, I liked her. We already talked about how there's a duology concept, another book, another spin-off story. But what else are you working on? Are you working on any standalones, any other series, anything else coming out soon?
So I'm very slowly but surely working on a completely different genre because I wanted to have like a little bit of a break from YA fantasy mythology and just try something different. So I don't even know when it'll be ready to come out into the world, but at the moment I'm working on a kind of paranormal romance. So I've switched out my mermaids and sirens for a vampire. And I've changed my Greek mythology for kind of Irish history. The very loose premise of it is a guy who, an ancient witch, turned him into a vampire to survive the Irish famine. And that's kind of the start of the story. But it's really exciting to write about. And it's weird writing a story that, although it has ancient like beginnings, it's set in modern times. So I've never wrote a story where they have bones and there's cars. And it's really weird writing about it because they don't need to write messenger pigeons. They don't need to get in a boat for 5 days. Like they can just, send a WhatsApp. It's so different. And so it's really exciting to write about. And I'm just learning a lot more about the writing craft, which is always good. You learn something new with every book.
And I think you touched on it with all the books out there, especially like any type of fantasy books, there's never any modern technology within the book. And it changes the perspective trying to write with technology, because without technology, so many more problems and issues come up because communication is such an issue within so many books. And I think that's one of the reasons why people really like escaping in the books into fantasy, into science fiction from back in like old days or older settings, because they can kind of escape and like get away from the easiness that we have in the world nowadays. We can pick up the phone and talk to someone. We're on a Zoom. You're in Ireland. I'm in the States. Like, this is magic on its own. Yeah. And so having those concepts within books, I couldn't imagine trying to write a book because everything could be solved so easily with a phone call in most stories.
Can you imagine if like in Meraki, she just rings up another island? She's like, hey, so like, it really ups the ante and it ups the tension of like, will the message get there in time, or they're kind of racing against things. And I just like that kind of drama and the tension. So yeah, it is actually really hard writing a book kind of in more modern times. That's why it's taking its time. But sure, look, it's always good to practice your writing muscles. And if it becomes nothing, then at least it's good exercise. So realistically, in the future, there probably will be another add-on to the Syren world because I just love it so much. It's so hard to leave behind.
Well, if you write more, I'm here for it. I'm here for it. And in your books, obviously this one, we talked about it. There's a lot of folklore and history. And then it sounds like in this other book that you're writing, there's a lot of Irish history. So do you have to do a lot of research for these books?
You have to, I think with any story, if you're including history or mythology from any culture, I think it's really important to read it, understand it, and then figure out how you want to interpret it. So are you going to, completely strictly follow what's believed, or are you going to interpret it in your own way? I think there's a fine balance between respecting it and then also making it your own and making it unique, and how you're going to incorporate it into this magical world that doesn't exist. Because it has to work around, the world building and the societal rules that you've built in your story. So like I do have gods, I do have magic, but it's really important that any of the mythology that I borrow is done in a way that makes sense for the world. So like it can't just copy and paste Wikipedia and stick it in. I have to incorporate it in a way that makes sense. So there are certain things that I've changed a little. So, if I can help people learn about mythology just in a little way, then that's always a great success.
Putting your own little spin to things too. I think that's always just fun in the creative aspect of writing.
Exactly, because like I doubt if, Icor back in the day worked that way. I'm pretty sure the god's blood doesn't translate to its descendants in that way, but that's the way I wanted to depict it. And I think it works well in my story. So it's just finding what works for you, really.
Oh, such a fun book, such a fun series. And I'm excited to see what comes from you next. Hopefully this paranormal romance comes out sooner rather than later. No rush, no pressure. All right. Well, this is Read It with Whiskey, and it wouldn't be Read It with Whiskey without talking a little bit about whiskey. So, Naomi, what is your favorite whiskey to drink?
I'd probably have to say either Teelings, or I really like Jameson as well. So any of the kind of Irish whiskeys I think are obviously my favorite. Teeling is made like not too far from where I live, and then Jameson is probably known on like a greater, wider stage. I'm a bit of a baby though. I can't drink whiskey like straight. It's not pleasant for me. So I love it more if it's like mixed with like ginger ale or a little bit of Coke. Perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah. I'll drink pretty much any whiskey, but those two are my favorite.
Awesome. Yeah. When I was over in Ireland, Jameson obviously was everywhere. Yeah. And we were up in Galway and I had Garravins, and I really enjoyed that whiskey. We did a whole whiskey tasting when we were there, and it was super fun.
There's so many here, and there's so many like micro distilleries and like really small local ones that, you might not even be able to get in another county, which I really like. So yeah, whiskey's a big part of the culture here.
So, Naomi, where can our listeners find you and find your books and follow along with your journey?
So if you want to follow me on social media, it's Naomi Kelly Writing for Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. So it's the same name for all of them. And then if you want to find my books, you can find Meraki, Kairos, and the latest book, Kalon. You can find all of them on Kindle. They're on Kindle Unlimited, and then Amazon for paperbacks. And then I also have like a special hardback edition of the first two books, the Syren Stories, together. So this is pretty new. It's like a really nice omnibus edition, which is great.
Oh, I love it. I didn't know about that. I may
It's
have
really
to.
nice.
Oh, so exciting. Well, I had so much fun talking to you about your book and learning more about you. So just thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really good. I always love talking to other people about who read my book. It's amazing.
I don't know about you, but I love to listen to people with accents. I think that's one of the reasons I have so many guests who aren't from the States, because I love other countries' accents. And I just loved listening to Naomi, even going back and listening to the interview after it was done. I just loved her voice so much. But anyway, I did want to give you guys an update about Naomi's books. So she has actually been nominated for not one, not two, but 12 categories in the Indie Ink Awards. And this is huge. So the Syren Stories as a whole were nominated, and this includes Meraki and Kairos. I just want to give her so much luck, and I'm just so excited for her to be nominated for this many categories. So let's all wish Naomi huge luck, and hopefully she can win some of those categories. All right, so next week, we're going to be talking with K.E. Barden. She is the author of The Gilded Mirror. This is book 1 in the Finding Ever After series. And if you like fairy tale retellings, then this is the episode that you are not allowed to miss, because this story does not have only 1 or 2 or 3 fairy tale retelling concepts, but a bunch. And these are the old school fairy tales. So we're talking Jack and Jill, Humpty Dumpty, all of those kind of nursery rhyme stories. Super fun book. The Finding Ever After series is going to be amazing when it's all complete. I'm so excited to dive in. So let's talk about it in the next episode. Talk to you soon. You've been listening to an episode of Read It with Whiskey. I am your host, Laura Juntunen, and I just wanted to personally hop in and say thank you so much for listening. Your support of the podcast means so much to me, and I would really appreciate it if you could go onto your favorite podcast platform and rate and review the show. By rating the show, you're going to help more people find the podcast, so then we can grow. Once you review the show, share it on your social media, share your favorite episode with your friends, and come back next time to hear more from self-published authors. I'll talk to you soon.